Yeah, Daron Jenkins is facing 2 counts of first-degree murder after police say he killed his mother and younger brother. They were found dead here in this home behind me. Now the cousin of the mother is speaking to us, trying to figure out.
You can just see he was so fidgetive. He was so anxious. He could not stay still.
What would make a mother pray for her son's return, only for that same son to destroy everything she loved in just 6 days? This wasn't a random act. It wasn't a stranger breaking in. This was betrayal from someone who was supposed to be coming home for a second chance. So, what went wrong? And how did a family's hope turn into their worst nightmare? To piece together how this story unfolded, we have to go back to the beginning, to a woman who believed, against all odds, that love could fix even the most broken things. Before news stories carried her name and strangers began sharing her photo, Daron Jenkins was simply living her life in Wilson, North Carolina. She wasn't loud or flashy, just the kind of person who made others feel seen. Whether she was working long shifts, volunteering at church, or dropping off a casserole to someone who didn't ask but clearly needed it, Daron had a way of showing up that made people believe the world wasn't all bad. To those lucky enough to be in her orbit, Daron felt like comfort in human form. She remembered the little things, like who just got a new job or whose kid had a birthday coming up, and she always followed up. Her kindness wasn't a performance. It was just how she moved through life. Even in a world that often rewards selfishness, Daron somehow held on to the idea that people were worth the trouble. Ironically, it was that unwavering belief that may have led her straight into harm's way. Daron Jenkins gave everything she had to raising her 2 boys, Daryn and Daryn. Life threw more than a few curveballs her way, but she met each one with steady hands and a heart that refused to quit. She poured her energy into her sons, determined to give them love, direction, and something solid to stand on, even when the ground beneath her own feet felt shaky. Daryn, her youngest, was her bright spot. He had a way of keeping things light, cracking jokes while bagging groceries or lingering after Sunday service just to help her fold chairs. Their connection didn't rely on big gestures or long talks. It was the quiet kind of closeness that felt easy, natural, and safe. Daryn, on the other hand, wandered into more troubled territory. Arrests, court dates, and long stretches behind bars became part of his story. Still, Daron refused to let go. She visited, wrote letters, and kept a seat open at the table, hope tucked into every gesture. In her mind, no detour was final. No one was too far gone. She didn't look at people and see failure. She saw possibilities, and maybe that's the twist in all this. She gave grace so freely. It never occurred to her that not everyone would treat it like a gift. No matter how strong her faith, Daron couldn't have anticipated what was quietly forming behind the scenes. The very love that defined her life would in time leave her exposed. For all her devotion, she couldn't have guessed that the 2 boys she held closest, so different in light and shadow, would eventually crash into each other in a way that no one saw coming. Daryn Cox, her youngest, brought a brightness to their home that people naturally responded to. Just 15, but already the kind of person who made others feel better simply by being there. His teachers often spoke of his quiet leadership, and classmates saw him as steady, kind, and present. He wasn't the center of attention, but he made sure others felt included, like a light bulb that didn't brag about being on. At Bedingfield High, Daryn was known for more than just good grades. He carried himself with calm assurance and ambition. He consistently made the honor roll, helped guide student activities, and seemed destined for something meaningful. At Mount Moriah Community Church, he pitched in behind the scenes and on stage, handling tech, playing instruments, and lifting others in quiet ways. Adults often smiled when they spoke of him, nodding knowingly and saying, "That one's been raised with care," and they weren't wrong. Dana and Daryn shared a connection that went far beyond typical family ties. Their lives moved in sync. Whether they were sharing a quiet moment in the kitchen or exchanging glances during a sermon, they simply understood each other. Some friends used to say it felt more like watching lifelong friends than mother and son. There were no slammed doors, no late-night arguments, just a mutual respect that ran deep. Whenever Dana spoke about Daryn, her voice softened. Her eyes sparkled in that unmistakable way that parents sometimes have when talking about the child who keeps them grounded. Through every hard season, he had been her reason to hold steady, and in every photo of them together, the affection wasn't posed. It was just there, effortless and real, which makes what followed even harder to accept, because Daryn wasn't just nearby when everything changed. He was in the middle of it, swept up in a moment where love, anger, and loyalty collided. The story of a bright future cut short didn't start with a single decision. It started with a door swinging open and history walking back in. For years, Dana had marked the days on the calendar. Her eldest, Daryn, was coming home. The house had been scrubbed, dinner was slow cooking, and the sense of hope was strong enough to fill the whole neighborhood. Dana greeted the day not with fear but with faith. She told anyone who would listen, "This is our fresh start," and in her heart she truly believed it. When Dana arrived to bring Daryn home, her face was full of emotion. She hugged him tightly, tears slipping down her cheeks. To her, this moment was a gift, an answered prayer, and a symbol that the worst was behind them. She believed wholeheartedly that this return marked a clean slate, a chance to rebuild what had once been lost. But the man who stepped back into her life wasn't the young son she had carried in her heart all those years. Daron Jenkins had spent the past 3 years in a correctional facility, serving time for burglary and stealing firearms. His troubled history went back years, beginning with theft charges in his late teens. At 19, he was arrested for stealing from cars parked outside a church. By 21, he had broken into a neighbor's house and taken a few personal items. While in custody, his record only grew with reports of disruptive behavior, conflicts with staff, and what officials classified as intentional misconduct. He hadn't earned early release. It was granted automatically, more due to paperwork than progress. Still, Dana didn't waver. She believed what she'd always believed, that people could change and love was worth the risk. On the day Daryn returned to the family home on Snowden Drive, the porch was decorated with a handmade sign and a few lopsided balloons that had clearly been tied up with care. Relatives gathered, food was shared, and smiles filled the room. In one photo from that afternoon, Dana stands beside her son, glowing with pride. If there were doubts in her mind, she didn't let them show, not even a little. But a closer look told a different story, one that carried an unsettling undertone. While everyone else smiled for the camera, Darion's expression remained unreadable. His face showed no emotion. His eyes seemed far away, as if he were standing there but not really present. And it wasn't just the photos that raised concern. People in the room picked up on it too. Relatives, family, friends, even neighbors sensed a tension they couldn't quite explain. There was something in the way he carried himself, rigid, quiet, withdrawn, that made others shift uneasily in their seats. Dana's cousin, Juanita, later said, "You could tell something was brewing." Another family member described him as having the air of someone who hadn't quite come home, like his body was there but his mind hadn't followed. So while the celebration felt genuine on the surface, a quiet discomfort had already entered the house. And over the next few days, that feeling only grew stronger. The reunion Dana had waited so long for began to lose its shine. There was a change in the energy, subtle at first but unmistakable. What had started as joy slowly turned into something heavier. Smiles became harder to hold, conversations felt more cautious, and those who noticed began to wonder if something was wrong. At first, it was easy to overlook. Daryn kept mostly to himself. He wandered the house at odd hours, quietly, moving from room to room, opening doors, checking locks, speaking in low tones no one could quite catch. Sometimes he'd stand motionless by the window, staring into the yard as if expecting something or someone to appear. Mid-sentence he would pause, drift away for a moment, then return with a quick, flat, "I'm fine," before walking off. His behavior gave off an uneasy energy. Some family members described him as restless. Others said he seemed tightly wound, like a machine running just a little too hot. One night, someone noticed him standing still in the hallway. Just standing, not talking, not moving, just watching. It wasn't threatening exactly, but it didn't feel normal either. Then one morning he came into the kitchen with a makeshift bandage on his hand. No story, no explanation, just a vague look and a wave of the hand like it wasn't worth talking about. The silence around it lingered longer than any conversation could have. Yet no one said much. They avoided questions, avoided conflict, mostly for Dana's sake. She had waited so long for this moment, for this version of her son. She believed he was on the right track, that this was the beginning of something better. And no one wanted to be the one to take that hope away from her, not yet. So instead of speaking out, everyone remained silent. When Daryn asked Dana for $200, saying he needed to take care of a few things, she handed it over without hesitation. After all, what mother wouldn't? Later, investigators would confirm what that money had actually gone toward. Basic cleaning supplies, a roll of tape, and a kitchen-style utility knife. The receipt, tucked away without much attention at the time, was dated just a few days before everything took a turn. Still, nothing was said. No warnings were given. No one wanted to shatter the hope Dana clung to, the belief that love could heal, that this homecoming was real. So they said nothing. That silence in the end cost everything. March 31st, 2025. It started off like any other Monday. Nothing remarkable, nothing alarming. But at 5:30 p.m., a call was placed to Wilson County Emergency Services. The voice on the other end was shaky, disoriented. The dispatcher struggled to understand what was happening. The only thing that came through clearly was this: something was very wrong. Officers were quickly sent to the home on Snowden Drive, the same quiet street where, less than a week earlier, a cheerful welcome sign had been hanging from the porch railing. When they arrived, nothing seemed out of place from the outside. Dana's car sat neatly in the driveway. The porch light was switched on and the windows were all intact. There were no noises, no broken doors, no signs that anything had gone wrong. But something about the stillness raised concern, and the front door wouldn't budge. What they discovered inside would remain etched in memory for a long time. There, in the same home that had once echoed with laughter and Sunday music, both Dana Jenkins, aged 50, and her 15-year-old son, Daryn Cox, were found unresponsive. Authorities later confirmed they had passed away. Investigators described the scene as deliberate and deeply unsettling. The act had not been chaotic. It had been methodical, as though someone had held on to something dark for too long before letting it out. Dana, the mother who had clung to hope even when it cost her, was found near the front entrance. Based on the evidence, she'd faced the worst of it. Daryn, her youngest, the one who still called her mom with warmth in his voice, was found farther inside the home. The details suggested he had tried to get away, tried to reach safety, but he hadn't made it in time. The scene left even veteran officers shaken. One responder later described it as something more expected on a battlefield than in a family living room. A moment so far removed from normal life that it barely felt real. But what came next was perhaps the most unsettling part of all. Daron Jenkins, 25 years old, the same son Dana had welcomed home with open arms, was still inside the house when officers arrived. He hadn't fled, he hadn't resisted. He simply stood there, still and emotionless. When they placed him under arrest, there was no reaction, no questions, no anger, just silence. By that evening, authorities confirmed that Daryn had been formally charged in relation to the incident involving his mother and younger brother. He was booked into the Wilson County Jail, where he would remain in custody without bond. Less than a week earlier, Dana had celebrated what she believed was a new beginning. Now those around her were left asking how a mother's faith in redemption had led to such a devastating end. Word of what happened in the Jenkins household moved quickly through Wilson. At first it was confusion, then sorrow, and eventually a quiet question seemed to rise everywhere at once. How did things go so wrong so fast? How could a place once filled with hope, with family dinners and warm porch lights, become the site of such unimaginable loss? What had started as a moment of celebration had turned into a community's heartbreak. And with every candle lit, every whispered prayer, and every hug exchanged on sidewalks, people couldn't help but wonder, if someone like Dana Jenkins wasn't safe, who was? The events surrounding Dana and Daryn shook more than just a household. They unsettled an entire town. In Wilson, news travels fast. A mother and her teenage son suddenly gone, not because of an accident or illness, but because of something no one had expected. Something people struggled to put into words. I still can't believe it. Not Dana's and not that sweet boy, someone whispered. The weight of it hung in the air. Neighbors stood together at the edge of the scene, quiet, unsure what to say. It felt impossible. It felt unfair, and for many it felt far too close to home. At Mount Moriah Community Church, where Dana's voice once echoed in prayer and Daryn's hands worked the sound booth every Sunday, the sorrow felt personal. Bishop Sherman Blandon, who had known them both for years, opened the doors for a prayer service the evening after the news broke. No invitation was needed. The moment the lights came on, the pews filled. People walked in slowly, some wiping away tears, others just trying to hold it together. They came not for answers, because none made sense, but for something to steady them. Even Bishop Blandin, a man whose faith never wavered in public, had to pause more than once at the pulpit. I've been preaching a long time, he told the congregation, his voice trembling. But today, even I don't understand. In the crowd, some cried openly, others sat frozen in disbelief. A few clutched old photos, Daryn holding a guitar, Dana in her Sunday best, while others whispered prayers that were mostly just questions. Many had hugged her the previous weekend. Now they stood in front of a memorial table with her smile printed on cardstock. That same night, the church's youth group gathered without their tech lead. Daryn's friends, the ones he taught to run cables and adjust microphones, now sat in a quiet circle trying to make sense of something that made no sense at all. At Beddingfield High, the silence was louder than words. Daryn's empty desk became more than just a piece of furniture. It became the place where grief sat. Teachers stumbled through lessons, doing their best to stay composed. Counselors were called in, not to fix anything, but simply to sit beside students who had just lost more than a classmate. They'd lost a friend who made every day a little brighter. Social media became a quiet gathering place. Candles lit up timelines. Old snapshots of Dana and Daryn appeared alongside Bible verses, prayers, and raw expressions of shock. One friend wrote, "Daryn had a heart too big for this world. Maybe heaven was just short one angel." Another simply said, "She held that boy like he was her whole world." Now they've both left it together. By the next day, they had been laid to rest together at Rest Haven Cemetery as gentle hands placed flowers and a final prayer echoed in the breeze. The crowd came to a quiet realization. This was no isolated sorrow. It was a shared loss felt far beyond the circle of family. As the town slowly tried to regain its footing, the collective focus began to shift. The initial shock made room for a deeper, more haunting question, one that rarely has a satisfying answer. On April 1st, 2025, just a day after the lives were lost, Daron Jenkins appeared before a judge. He stayed silent. No tears, no words, just a blank stare that somehow made the courtroom feel even heavier. He didn't flinch. He didn't speak. He just looked ahead like someone waiting for directions. Oddly calm for a man facing the most serious of accusations, the courtroom felt frozen in place. No whispers, no movement, just the kind of quiet that settles in after something irreversible has happened. The formal charges were presented, 2 counts of premeditated murder. Bail was not considered an option. The judge ordered him to remain in custody. From the outset, prosecutors made their position clear. This wasn't a snap decision or a result of emotional instability. In their view, this had been carefully thought out. Assistant District Attorney Holly Rebel addressed the judge, pointing to both the nature of the crime and Darion's past record as grounds for the strictest bond, though in the end none was granted. One of the victims, just 15 years old, had been a student at Beddingfield High. His memory now lives on through the voices of classmates and members of Mount Moriah Community Church. Court records reveal that Jenkins had been released from prison on March 25th, just 7 days before the events that followed. The charges that led to his earlier sentence were unrelated, but the timing added a troubling layer to the case. Authorities in Wilson confirmed that Jenkins now faced 2 counts of first-degree murder as detectives continued to piece together the events that led to the tragic loss of life. "This is heartbreaking for everyone involved," one local leader said during a press statement. "No one walks away from this untouched. My thoughts are with all who are trying to process what's happened." As investigators dug deeper, more details surfaced, none of them easy to hear. Jenkins had previously been denied early release on 2 separate occasions, each time due to behavioral issues while incarcerated. His eventual release wasn't the result of reform, but the end of a required sentence, an unfortunate technicality rather than a triumph of rehabilitation. Then another piece of information surfaced, one that cast an even darker shadow over the case. Documents showed that Dana Jenkins had a workplace life insurance policy. It wasn't extravagant, but it was enough to catch the attention of someone in need. The beneficiary? Her son. The same person she had welcomed back home with open arms and quiet faith may have viewed that homecoming as something else entirely. A transaction rather than a reunion. Investigators now believe that if Daryn had been able to stage the scene, make it appear random, mislead authorities, or suggest a forced entry, he may have succeeded in collecting the insurance payout and quietly walking away. But was it really just about the money? Or had something far more complicated been building inside him? Was it long-standing resentment? A feeling that Dana gave Daryn a kind of love he never received? Did he see his younger brother, bright, respectful, and deeply involved in his community, as a painful reminder of paths he had closed off long ago? We may never fully understand what was going through Daron Jenkins' mind in those final days. Yet prosecutors argued that the warning signs had been present. The items he purchased, the lack of communication, the careful planning. They believe it all pointed in one direction. This wasn't random, it was methodical. A painful breach of trust that left a family devastated and an entire community mourning the loss of two lives that meant so much to so many. And as the legal process moves forward, one sentiment remains deeply felt by those left behind. No courtroom outcome will return what was taken. Daryn, only 15, wasn't the target of anger, but he became part of the aftermath, a young life full of joy caught in the path of someone else's pain, and a mother's unwavering belief that things could still get better. And perhaps the hardest part to accept is this: it didn't have to end this way. Darion's background wasn't hidden in fine print. He had been turned down for parole on 2 occasions, carried a record of volatile behavior, and showed little indication of positive change while incarcerated. Still, he was released with no support plan, no assessment of risk, and no heads up to the family preparing to welcome him back. No follow-up appointments, no accountability, no protection, just a scheduled release and a ride back to the same front door. Dana didn't stand a chance, and she's not alone. All over the country, families are opening their homes in hope, setting up spare rooms, preparing favorite meals, posting updates that say he's finally back. And without realizing it, they may be opening the door to something far more complicated. They lead with hope, with faith, with the belief that love can rewrite the story. But sometimes love can lead you blindly because not everyone wants to be rescued, and not everyone returns with open arms. Some arrive with hidden intentions. We can't keep brushing aside the early signs. We can't confuse peace and quiet with progress. Because what happened to Dana wasn't a failure of parenting. It was a failure of policy and a failure of awareness, ours included. When we choose comfort over confrontation and optimism over caution, it all changed in less than a week. What began with hope ended in loss. One moment the door opened to a new beginning. The next, loved ones were gathering to say goodbye. Time didn't pause, it simply moved too fast. And in that brief window, everything unraveled. This case truly tugs at the heart. A powerful reminder that even the strongest families can face unimaginable struggles beneath the surface. It shows how hope and love don't always protect us from pain, and how sometimes the hardest battles are the ones we don't see. Most people will forget this case by tomorrow. The families involved never get that chance. If you believe stories like this deserve a lasting audience, subscribe and help keep these cases in the public eye.